An avoidant feels the real shock of you giving up, not when you block them in anger, but when you detach in reality. When you stop chasing, stop over-explaining, and quietly accept what their behavior has already told you. Because for the longest time, their nervous system has been trained to believe that no matter how far they pull back, you will always come forward. No matter how cold they get, you will bring the warmth. No matter how confusing the dynamic becomes, you will be the one trying to fix, decode, repair, and reconnect. As long as you are reacting, even if you're angry, crying, writing long paragraphs, or threatening to leave, they feel a strange kind of safety in that. Their ego hears, you still care. You're still emotionally invested. I still matter enough to upset you. So your intensity never really registers as an ending. It registers as proof that the connection is still alive. You can block them in a rage, send a final essay, or declare, I'm done. And if your energy still revolves around them, if you're still checking, still unblocking, still watching, still hoping they'll chase you, it doesn't fully land as you giving up. It just lands as another round of the same cycle. The real shock hits them when something in you goes quiet in a different way. When you are not posturing, not performing, not trying to pull a reaction out of them. When you're not secretly hoping they'll suddenly wake up and prove you wrong, but instead you accept, in your bones, that they have shown you who they are willing to be with you, and you finally believe it. That acceptance is not loud. It doesn't always come with dramatic goodbye speeches. It often comes with fewer words, shorter replies, or no reply at all. It shows up in you not explaining yourself the 10th time, not arguing when they twist the story, not chasing clarity from someone who has repeatedly proven they hide behind vagueness. It's you seeing their patterns clearly, disappearing during conflict, minimizing your feelings, avoiding depth. And instead of spinning another hopeful story around it, you simply stop fighting it. You may still love them, still miss them, still think about the good moments, but your behavior shifts from convince them to release this. And that is what their system isn't ready for. Avoidants are often more sensitive to losing control than they are to losing connection. They live in a mindset where emotional closeness feels dangerous and emotional distance feels like safety. So they pull back when things get intense. But they also quietly rely on knowing you're still there as a kind of emotional backup. That knowledge lets them tell themselves, I'm not really losing anything. They'll reach out. And that story protects them from feeling the full consequence of how they've treated you. When you detach in reality, when your actions finally align with the words you've said before, I can't keep doing this. I deserve more. I'm tired of being hurt. Their story breaks. They realize maybe you won't reach out this time. Maybe that safety net they thought was guaranteed has been removed. And that's when they feel something they hate. Vulnerability. Suddenly, they are no longer the one who gets to decide when and how the connection resumes. They are no longer the emotionally strong one above it all. They are faced with the possibility that your love was not infinite, that your patience had a limit, that your heart, which they took for granted, could actually close its door. Your quiet acceptance hits them differently than your anger ever did, because it no longer invites a power struggle. It offers no opening for them to argue, defend, or deflect. There is nothing to push against, no dramatic scene to hide behind. Just the empty space where your effort used to be. You're not asking for an apology, so they can't soothe their guilt with a half-hearted one. You're not begging for reassurance, so they can't calm you with temporary crumbs. You're not chasing closeness, so they can't regulate their self-esteem by seeing you always come back. Instead, you are living your life, maybe still hurting, but no longer orienting every move around their potential return. That is the part that shocks them. Not that you were hurt. They always knew you were hurt. They saw it. They heard it. They just believed you would tolerate it forever. What they didn't expect was that the same person who forgave, explained, and stayed through so many cycles would one day simply stop stepping back into the ring. When you detach in reality, the message to them is no longer, I'm trying to make you understand my value. It becomes, I understand my value now, with or without you. And for someone whose entire pattern is built on staying in control by staying distant, realizing that your heart has moved beyond their reach is a deeper shock than any angry goodbye could ever deliver. Their initial response is almost always denial dressed up as arrogance, because the avoidant ego cannot immediately tolerate the idea that you, the one who always tried, always reached out, always softened first, have actually stopped. So instead of feeling the loss honestly, they reach for the story that has always protected them. They're just being dramatic. They're trying to teach me a lesson. They always come back. And that story lets them stay calm on the surface while the ground under them is already starting to shift. At first, they genuinely believe it. They tell themselves you're playing a game, that your silence is just another tactic to pull a reaction out of them. And because they've seen you bend before, they lean back into the old script. They wait you out. They might even feel a little superior, convinced that you need them more than they need you, that you'll eventually break and send the first message. But as time passes and that message doesn't come, the denial starts to crack. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, in the tiny moments they didn't plan for. They go to post something and notice you haven't interacted in days. They have a bad day and realize they can't run to your empathy like they used to. They scroll through your profile and see you living, laughing, doing life without them at the center. And each of those moments is like a small fracture in the armor of their certainty. Their arrogance is a shield, but shields are heavy, and it becomes harder and harder to hold up when reality keeps whispering, maybe this time they're really gone. The part that shakes them most is your non-reactivity, because avoidants are used to measuring their importance in your life by how intensely you react to them. Your tears, your long texts, your repeated attempts to talk things through have always been proof to them that they still mattered. So when a version of you shows up that doesn't play into that doesn't chase after a dry okay, that doesn't send follow-ups when they leave you on red, that doesn't explode or beg when they withdraw, their brain doesn't know where to put this new information. They keep waiting for the old you to return. And when you don't, their internal narrative starts to fight itself. One part saying, relax, they've always come back. Another part whispering, but what if they don't this time? That whisper grows louder every day you remain steady in your distance. Not cold, not hateful, just unavailable for the same cycle. And that is where their sense of control begins to collapse, because control, for an avoidant, has never just been about choosing distance. It has been about choosing distance while still feeling sure they could reclaim closeness whenever they wanted it. They needed the comfort of knowing that you were waiting on the other end of their silence. When you stop orbiting them, when you stop letting their push-pull determine your emotional weather, they are confronted with a reality they have avoided for a long time. That you were a free, choosing human being the whole time. Not a permanent fixture, not a fallback option, not an inexhaustible resource, but someone whose love could be lost. And that realization is deeply destabilizing for someone who has built their emotional identity on, I don't really need anyone. Because if they truly didn't need anyone, your absence wouldn't bother them. Yet it does. It nags at them. It bothers them that you haven't checked, that you're not liking, that you're not watching every story, that you're not at their emotional beck and call anymore. And instead of admitting that this hurts, their first instinct is to double down on arrogance. They might talk about you dismissively to others. They were too intense anyway. They couldn't handle me. They're just trying to get a reaction. But that performance is for their own protection more than anything. A way to delay the moment they have to face the truth that their behavior has real consequences. Your calm, consistent non-reaction becomes something they can't easily explain away because it doesn't look like a tantrum. It doesn't look like manipulation. It doesn't look like you trying to lure them out of hiding. It looks like acceptance. And acceptance is terrifying to someone who has always assumed your love was a given, your forgiveness automatic, your presence guaranteed. So their mind starts looping. testing old assumptions against new evidence. If they still wanted me, wouldn't they have reached out by now? Why are they not freaking out like before? Did they meet someone else? Did I misjudge how attached they were? And with every unanswered question, their sense of control erodes a little more, until what once felt like a secure grip on your heart starts to feel like sand slipping through their fingers. This collapse of control is not always visible externally. They might still post as usual, still act unbothered in public, still maintain their cool, detached persona. But inside, something has changed. The narrative that kept them safe, they'll always be there, no longer holds. And when that narrative dies, they're forced to either confront their own fear, their own avoidance, their own role in losing someone who cared deeply for them, or run harder into distraction to avoid feeling that truth. Either way, the dynamic has shifted. Because once your non-reactivity cracks their old story, they can never again be as sure of their hold on you as they once were. And whether they ever admit it or not, that realization is the thing that truly shocks them, not your anger, not your tears, but the fact that the person they thought would always come back finally decided not to. Your calm distance forces them into out-of-character behaviors because it breaks the unspoken rule their nervous system has always relied on. The rule that says, I can pull away and they will move closer. And when that rule stops working, they have to reach for tools they've never really used before. Things like quick replies, direct check-ins, sudden vulnerability, nostalgia, and even apologies. Not because they've turned into a completely healed, secure partner overnight, but because the strategy of avoidance no longer gives them the result it used to, which was distance without the risk of losing you. When you were still emotionally chasing, even in anger, they could remain in their comfort zone. They could ignore messages for hours, reply with dry, one-word answers, disappear for days, and still feel relatively safe, because your reactions reassured their ego that the bond was intact. So long as you cared enough to be upset, they were not in danger of truly losing you. But when you stop playing that role, when your responses become slow, neutral, or non-existent, when you stop feeding the dynamic with questions, explanations, and emotional monologues, their avoidance stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like a threat to their access to you. Suddenly, the old pattern backfires. The distance they've always used to regulate their anxiety begins to create a different kind of anxiety. The fear that maybe this time there will be no bounce back, no emotional rescue from you, no soft re-entry into your life after they've calmed down. So they start doing things that might surprise you, like replying quickly when before they'd take hours, initiating conversations instead of waiting for you to carry the weight, asking, "How have you been?" in a way that feels more intentional, dropping specific memories into the chat. Remember when we... Because memory is one of the fastest ways to try to reopen a closed emotional door. They might even say versions of words you begged to hear in the past. I know I messed up. I've been thinking about us a lot. I miss you. And it can feel surreal because for so long you were the one pushing for depth and they were dodging it. And now here they are, suddenly reaching toward the very intimacy they used to avoid. But it's important to understand the engine behind that behavior. Their nervous system is trying to restore equilibrium, not necessarily to step into a whole new level of emotional maturity. Your calm distance has removed the old equilibrium where they could behave in distant, inconsistent ways and still feel certain you'd always be there. So now they're almost scrambling to test whether you are truly gone or just temporarily quiet. Every quick reply, every nostalgic reference, every out-of-nowhere, "How's your heart?" is partly genuine feeling and partly a probe, a way to ask, "Do I still have you?" without risking the vulnerability of saying those exact words. In a way, your new energy writes a different script for both of you. You are no longer feeding their ego with big reactions, and because their ego isn't being stroked in the same way, they have to decide whether they're willing to engage from a deeper place or let you go. And that decision is what pulls out these unusual behaviors. The avoidant who once acted like they were above caring now finds themselves checking your online status, staring at unsent messages, composing and deleting paragraphs, debating whether to double text, feeling frustrated that the tricks that used to pull you back in no longer land the same. And that frustration pushes them closer to confronting their true feelings than any argument ever did. A lot of them will start small. A simple, hey, a reaction to your story. This made me think of you. Trying to see if your old patterns return, if you light up and rush to reattach, and when you don't, when your response is measured or your silence remains. They feel something they've worked very hard to avoid feeling for most of their lives. The vulnerability of not being in control. And that's when you see the bigger gestures, the long messages, the sudden interest in talking things through, the suggestion to meet, or even the rare, honest admission that they took you for granted. It is not that your distance healed them. It is that your distance exposed the limitations of the avoidance strategy they relied on, forcing them to either evolve or risk losing you completely. And it's in that pressure that these out-of-character behaviors are born, not from magic, but from the collision between their fear of closeness and their fear of losing the one person who kept showing up. Until one day, you finally didn't. Their reaction, whether it comes as intense love bombing, sudden vulnerability, or sharp anger and blame, is evidence that your absence hit them, that your withdrawal registered in their nervous system in a way your words and tears never fully did. But you must understand that this reaction is a sign of impact, not a guarantee of transformation. And if you confuse the two, you will walk right back into the same cycle that almost broke you. When an avoidant feels the ground of the dynamic shifting, when the person they quietly assumed would always be there suddenly steps back, it stirs something real inside them. They might feel panic, regret, loss, shame, or ego injury. And those feelings can be powerful enough to push them into behavior you have never seen before. They might send long messages at 2 a.m., admit they took you for granted, confess that they miss you, talk about how they've been thinking of you non-stop. They might suddenly initiate conversations, respond faster, suggest meeting up, even use language that sounds like commitment. I want to do better. I don't want to lose you again. This time will be different. And because you waited so long for this, a part of you wants to take those words as proof that the story has finally changed. On the flip side, their reaction might come out as anger and defensiveness. They might accuse you of abandoning them, of giving up too easily, of being cold, disloyal, or immature for walking away. They may twist the narrative so they're the one who was wronged, not because they truly believe you were the villain, but because it hurts less to be angry with you than to face how deeply they betrayed themselves by pushing away someone who cared. And even this angry reaction is still a form of impact. It shows that your decision affected them enough to disturb their self-image, to rattle the story they tell themselves about always being the one who leaves first, always being immune to loss. But here's the crucial piece. A reaction is just that, a reaction. It is a moment, a spike of awareness, a surge of feeling, and while it can be honest in that moment, it doesn't automatically translate into the sustained emotional labor and self-confrontation required to actually build a healthy, stable, secure relationship with you. The problem is that your longing heart will want to treat that reaction as the end of the journey, the long-awaited proof that they did love you, that you weren't crazy, that all your intuition was right. And when you grab onto that reaction and cling to it like a promise, you skip the only part that really matters, watching what they do consistently after the wave of emotion passes. Love bombing is intoxicating because it mirrors the fantasy you've held in your head. The version of them who finally shows up, finally sees you, finally admits what you meant to them. And anger can be just as intoxicating in a different way, because even their rage confirms that you mattered, that you touched something deep enough to trigger a strong response. But neither of these emotional spikes tell you whether they have built the muscles they never had before, the ones that stay in the room during conflict, communicate when they are overwhelmed, take responsibility for their impact without turning everything back onto you. Those muscles are not grown in one night, one confession, one heartfelt paragraph. They are grown over time, in the boring, unglamorous work of self-reflection, therapy, accountability, new choices, and repeated practice. Their reaction shows you that you were never insignificant, that your energy was never cheap, that your absence left a mark, and that can be deeply healing for the part of you that felt discarded or invisible. But it is not a reason by itself to hand your heart back over without discernment. The real test is not how loudly they panic when they realize you're gone. It's how steadily they show up if you decide to give even a sliver of access back. Do they keep consistency after the initial emotional rush fades, or do they sink back into avoidance once they feel safe again? Do they follow through on the changes they talk about? Or do they use their big reaction as a kind of emotional reset button, expecting you to forgive and forget without any structural difference in how they love you? Your job is not to deny that their reaction means something. It does. It means you mattered. But your deeper responsibility is to ask whether that meaning is enough to justify risking your nervous system again. The old you would have taken their reaction as a green light. The new you has to treat it as information, an opening, at most a starting point, and then pay far more attention to what they build with that opening than to the intensity of the moment where they finally realized you were capable of walking away. The real turning point is inside you, and it happens the moment their sudden attention stops having the power to erase your memory of how badly the old pattern damaged your peace, your self-worth, and your nervous system. Because for the longest time, one text from them could wipe out weeks of pain. One "I miss you" could cancel out nights of crying. One moment of closeness could make you forget the 10 times they disappeared. Your brain would grab onto any sign of softness as proof that the story wasn't over, and your body, desperate for relief from the anxiety, would flood you with hope. You weren't weak for responding to that. You were human, starved for consistency, and emotionally conditioned to associate their crumbs with safety. But that conditioning is exactly what kept you going back into a cycle that broke you again and again. The turning point comes after you've sat with yourself in the silence, when no one is texting, when no one is coming to rescue you, when you've had to hold your own shaking hands through withdrawal, when you've had to face the truth that their distance wasn't just a phase, but a pattern, and their inability to show up wasn't just a misunderstanding, but a limitation. It comes when you've replayed not only the highlight reel, but the full movie, the canceled plans, the unanswered messages, the gaslighting, the way your chest tightened when you saw their name because you never knew if it meant warmth or coldness, love or punishment. In that space, you start to feel something new growing inside you, a quiet, steady refusal to betray yourself in the same way ever again. And that refusal is what protects you when they finally circle back. Because they almost always circle back in some form. A "Hey stranger, thought of you today. I missed talking to you." And the old you would have melted, would have read those words and immediately rushed past everything that happened, telling yourself, see, they do care. Maybe this time is different. But the you who has done even a little healing doesn't get amnesia so easily anymore. Their message still hits your heart. You still feel the ache. But right behind that ache is a wave of memory, not just of how much you loved them, but of what loving them cost you. You remember staring at your phone and feeling sick. You remember lowering your standards. You remember making excuses for behavior that would have broken your friend's heart if you saw it happening to her. And that memory no longer gets overridden just because they have finally noticed your absence. The turning point is when your nervous system has tasted a bit of calm without them, when you've had some mornings where you woke up not checking your phone first, some nights where you fell asleep without spiraling about what you did wrong, some days where you laughed and realized you didn't think of them for a few hours. And that experience of peace becomes something you're unwilling to trade away, even for the thing you once wanted most, their attention. So when they suddenly show up with big feelings, your first thought isn't, "I've won." It's, "What will this cost me if I let it back in?" You start asking different questions, not, "Do they miss me?" Because of course they do on some level, but, "Have they changed in a way that makes it safe for me to be close again?" Not, "Will they leave again?" but, Will I abandon myself again if I say yes to this? And that shift is everything. You begin to measure their return against your healed self, instead of measuring your healed self against their return. You look at your life, your growing stability, your slowly rebuilding confidence, the way your body has started to relax now that you're not constantly waiting for the next emotional blow, and you realize that their presence is no longer the center of your world. It is a variable, one that has to earn its way back in, not through promises or intensity, but through sustained, consistent, grounded behavior. The turning point is when you are honest enough with yourself to admit that no matter how much you once loved them, you cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot unfeel the way your soul felt every time they pulled away. You cannot unsee the way you shrank yourself to keep them comfortable. And you decide, maybe for the first time in your life, that your peace is not negotiable, that your nervous system is not a playground, that your heart is not available to anyone who treats it like an emotional convenience. In that moment, their reaction, their panic, their regret, their sudden sweetness stops being your guiding star and becomes just one piece of information. And your own body's response, your own standards, your own hard-won clarity become the thing you trust more than any apology, more than any "I miss you," more than any promise that this time will be different. That is the real turning point, not when they finally realize your value, but when you finally refuse to forget it just because they showed up late.